Good morning, class. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. Joe and I are glad to come back here for Lesson 10 in our Christian Worldview Apologetics course. And very simply put, we're going to get into our next worldview today, which is an overview and critique of Buddhism. So we just came from Hinduism. Now we're going to get into a little bit on Buddhism. And we just want to work through this like we've done every other worldview. We want to present the worldview, let it speak for itself, and then compare and contrast it with the Christian worldview. And we keep using this phrase, internal critique. That means that we want to explore the worldview, let it speak, and then based on its own claims, we want to critique it and see if it adds up and if it corresponds and if it's viable.
Yes.
And hint, hint, we believe that none of the other worldviews are, except the Christian biblical worldview. So, one thing that stood out to me when we were discussing Hinduism is the fact that there was no single founder, there was no originator. You know, it wasn't as if one man came and delivered this sacred text to all his followers. It was more of an amalgamation of sayings and writings and poems and philosophies that kind of had just come together over the years. So now we turn our attention to Buddhism, and it's a little bit different because we can identify an individual who is largely responsible for the teachings of the Buddhist worldview. And that individual is Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama. And so we want to begin this morning, and Joe, I want to throw this over to you, and we want to discuss who this man was and a little bit about his background, and hopefully that kind of sets the stage for our discussion about what he taught. So you want to just give us a little overview of Siddhartha?
Sure, and feel free to jump in whenever you want.
Absolutely.
Siddhartha, he grew up in ancient India or on the border of India, somewhere around the area of Nepal. That's kind of where some scholars think he originated from, but he grew up within very much a Hindu environment. Sometime between the 4th and the 5th centuries before Christ, the 5th and the 4th centuries before Christ. At some point in his life, Siddhartha was very moved by the suffering that he saw in the world as people experienced it in both life and death. And he began a quest to seek an answer to the end of suffering, what he felt was the end of suffering. So he saw suffering as the big problem in life and in death. And this quest led him to becoming what he referred to as the Buddha, who's the awakened one or the enlightened one. So he claimed the status of Buddha because he claimed to be enlightened. So the question becomes, how did Siddhartha come to that place where he felt like he had some answers to the questions about suffering and reality as a whole? He claimed Siddhartha was on his journey seeking answers, and he claimed he saw a vision one day of 4 passing sights. He claimed that he saw an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a shaven monk. And after he had this vision, he started out on his mission to understand why there was suffering in the world. And he tried joining a Hindu ascetic cult. And they practiced self-beating. That was one of the things that they did, self-denial, self-beating, in order to, I guess, enhance or increase their spirituality. He almost died because of the intense participation he took in that. He took it seriously, in other words. He took the beating seriously, and he almost died as a result of it. At some point after this, he became what he referred to as enlightened. He became the Buddha. The truth about Buddhism, as he described it, was the path of the middle way. In other words, the path he felt to salvation and away from suffering was a path that was to be taken between the two extremes of asceticism and pleasure. So he saw asceticism on one side, pleasure on the other, and he felt that his path was more of one of a middle path away from either of those two extremes.
Can I just define asceticism really quick?
Yes.
So asceticism being the idea that we need to deny ourselves in an extreme fashion,
Yes.
and even view our bodies and our physical existence as something bad or evil or dirty.
Yeah.
So it does pop up in church history.
Yes.
People that practiced asceticism, and you think of monks
In
and
Christian
monasteries.
church
It
history,
does, it
yes.
does. And I would say it really took on some forms of deep error.
Yeah, not biblical.
It's not.
No.
So when Siddhartha experienced asceticism, which was this extreme self-denial, even to the point of beating himself,
Yeah.
he said, that's not it.
Right.
And then the other extreme, the opposite of asceticism, would be some sort of indulgence, maybe hedonism, living
Right.
for pleasure and just indulging whatever desires you have.
Yeah.
So the middle way, he said, is
Yes.
between them.
Exactly. So at some point after he became enlightened, he claimed that Mara, who was a Hindu deity, an evil Hindu deity, I might say, came to him under a fig tree one day, and when he was meditating, and Mara tempted him. But he overcame Mara's temptation and was enlightened. And by becoming enlightened, he became the Buddha. After he claimed that he became enlightened, he went into a period of ecstasy, of rapture, for 49 days. And at the end of that 49 days of ecstasy, where I'm assuming he was experiencing great knowledge, it just a period of just enjoying that, reveling in that enlightenment, he set out to preach and share about his experience with others. Now, Buddha's teaching wasn't conducted solely on the basis of authority in the same way that Hindu priests would have claimed to have some authority. But he really wanted to have an experience based on, he really wanted for others to have an experience similar to what he had experienced. So it's a very experience-based, experience-focused religion.
You can see that in the way it was birthed.
Yes.
A vision
Yes.
of 4 passing sights.
Yes.
This personal encounter with a spirit being
Yes.
who was evil. And
Yeah.
so it's very much based on his own personal experiences.
Yeah,
Right?
he wanted to create a religion that was devoid of any ritual, of any speculation, of any distractions, like trying to ponder the mystical truth of oneness, in Hinduism. Buddha wanted to avoid tradition in that way and have individuals seek their own fresh religious experiences in a very serious way, following that middle path in order to move to the end of suffering and experience their own personal salvation in relation to that. So just some thoughts here, random thoughts relating to Buddhism. Buddhism denies the supernatural. Siddhartha said that the supernatural was only a shortcut. It was a form of speculation that should be avoided. Buddhism is also an atheistic religion, which is very surprising to some people. There is no belief in a personal God or supreme being in Buddhism. Buddhists are very much here and now people. They want to emphasize the immanence of reality, not transcendence, not the realities that are kind of out there beyond human experience, but what's happening imminently in our lives and the moral implications of that. Buddhists want to be very moral people, and they have a moral code, or Siddhartha tried to establish and set forth what he thought was a moral code that people should be following as part of their experience. Buddhism does not have a doctrine of creation as such. It actually denies the creation of the universe and reality, an original creation. It just kind of has always existed according to Buddhism. Buddha held to the doctrine of karma. He did hold to the doctrine of karma in the same way, similarly, but different to the way Hindus hold it. He saw karma as an impersonal cosmic law of retribution, and he basically said that the way you live your life would be visited upon you in your next life. So the way you live your life now, the way one lives their life now, determines the outcome of their next life. And he also said that it's your karma that makes you who and what you are. It is what holds you together, an individual's karma.
So we have, like Hinduism,
Yes.
we have a notion of reincarnation.
Yes.
We have a notion of karma.
Yes.
This impersonal force
Yes.
that can determine your status
Yeah.
in the next life.
Yep.
So there's some similar themes here.
But there's also some differences.
Yeah, there's some very distinct differences.
So Buddha taught the doctrine of anatta. Anatta means no soul. So he did not believe that human beings as individuals had a soul or a spirit. There was no soul or spirit in man according to the Buddha. So the question would become, well, when you die, what is it that gets passed on and gets reincarnated as something else? So the way he explained it is, he explained it as karma as being like the flame that passes between two candles. So an individual in this life is, they have their own flame, it sits upon their own candle, the shell of what appears to be their own individual existence. And then when they die, the candle, they kind of light somebody else's candle, and their flame gets passed on, but not their soul. So it was, Buddhism is very much denies the individuality of a soul, but the karma of the individual gets passed on.
There's a catchy saying there, that in the re, so the me is lost in the re.
Yeah.
Like in other words, my consciousness and my soul is not being passed on.
There's no
so the me
and
is
the re
gone.
of reincarnation.
But there is a reincarnation where my flame
Yes.
moves on,
Yes.
even though I don't.
No personal continuity.
Right.
There's no personal continuity between this life and the reincarnated next life
yeah.
for believers. Although Buddhism is supposed to eschew, of course, ritual and ceremony, the poor in Buddhism, as the poor in every sect, in every religion, tends towards paganism, tends towards having a lot of ritual. So there's a lot of, in fact, in practice, there ends up being a lot of ritual practice. But that's not what Siddhartha taught originally. That was not supposed to be a part of his religion. Just a real emphasis on moralism and moral living in the here and now. So salvation in Buddhism is one that results, according to the Buddha, of intense personal physical effort. One must completely work out their own salvation. And salvation happens when one breaks away from samsara, as he described it, the wheel of life. So there's the wheel of life going on with these reincarnations, people dying and then being rebirthed, dying and being rebirthed, dying and being rebirthed, until they escape from that wheel and are able to move away from the wheel of life. And when that happens, Buddha taught the individual would experience nirvana. Nirvana, which was, we might define that as pure ecstasy. We'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. But the doctrine of nirvana in Buddhism amounts to an ethical reality where future rebirth is not something that one has to worry about. They no longer have any cravings. They're released from suffering and from karma, and they do not have to worry about their candle flame being passed on.
They don't have to worry about that.
Right.
That's kind of the emphasis, isn't it? There's not
a concern.
You don't have to stress
No.
about it. You don't have to concern yourself with it.
And Buddha, unlike the caste system, if you remember from Hinduism, emphasized that for an individual to achieve freedom, to achieve oneness, a unity with Brahman, which is the goal of salvation in Hinduism. In order to experience nirvana, unlike Hinduism, where the Hindus believed they had to move up as individuals, be reincarnated into the next caste, the higher caste, and move up the caste system in order to arrive at the top of the caste where they could eventually achieve salvation. The Buddha said, no, you don't need to move up through the caste system. So he was very egalitarian in the sense that he believed that members of any caste, if they lived a moral life in this life, they could achieve salvation or nirvana in the next life. They didn't have to move up through that caste system. Buddhism tries to teach people that there's a cause and effect relationship which brings about suffering. The main problem, according to Buddhism, is answering what is suffering and how does one solve the problem of suffering. So very central in the Buddha's journey about answering those questions was his idea that it was our personal desires that bring about suffering.
So that's a big word in Buddhism, is suffering.
Yes.
So he seems to have been motivated by these visions that he saw of an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a monk, and his journey to understand suffering, to overcome suffering,
Yes.
to resolve the problem of suffering.
Yeah.
So all of this, this salvation experience has to do with resolving the issue of suffering.
Yes, Buddha was looking for a practical, empirical, and very pragmatic way for people to achieve salvation and end their suffering. And that would include, the focus of eliminating the personal desires which bring about suffering.
That's the problem.
The problem
Suffering comes
Yes.
from human desire. So
Exactly.
There's a direct correlation between the things that we want, or just desire in general,
Yes.
desire
Yes.
itself,
Yes.
and suffering. He
Yes.
saw them as inherently connected to each other.
Yes.
So then we have the question, Joe, if suffering is the problem, suffering is the big problem, and my desires are the cause of suffering.
You have to get rid of desire.
What do I do with this? How do I
that?
actually break free
How do
from
we
this?
move to
Yeah.
achieve salvation? What's the path that an individual would take to achieve salvation? So Buddhism teaches that there are four noble truths. Four noble truths. First truth is that life is suffering. In other words, bad things happen. The cause of suffering is our own personal desire for pleasure or being individualistic. That's seen as a problem. That's the second truth. We want to acquire things and we are selfish. That was the second noble truth. The third noble truth is that suffering will cease, according to what Buddha taught, when desires cease. We should think of ourselves in terms of a universal all and get rid of our individualism and our personal desires. And the fourth noble truth is, as he taught it, the cessation of desire comes with perfect detachment. So when one achieves perfect detachment from the desires that encompass our lives, they're going to know that they've achieved that point of a cessation of desire.
So I want to try to sum up what we said so far.
Yeah.
I need to break free from the wheel of life.
Yeah.
I need to obey karmic law
Yeah.
so that my flame that gets passed on to the next life is benefiting or moving forward in some fashion. And in the here and now, the way I'm going to accomplish this is by detaching myself from desire. It's a separation from my physical and even immaterial appetites.
Yes.
So I need to break free from that, and I need to become detached. And how do I do that, Joe? So suffering is the problem.
We know everything that you've just said from the Four Noble Truths,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how do we do that, right? So Buddha taught there's an eightfold path to the end of suffering and the achievement of perfect detachment, an eightfold path. So the first point in the eightfold path would be for one to have right views. The right views, of course, are the Four Noble Truths, which we just discussed. The second part of the eightfold path would be having right desires. So an individual will have freedom from lust, ill will, and cruelty. Those would be right desires. Third would be right speech. Buddha taught that we should be truthful and not talk in any vain way. The fourth point on the Eightfold Path would be for an individual to have right conduct. Buddha taught that we must be charitable and not kill living things. Human beings should be charitable and not kill living things. The fifth point, where humans are supposed to be pure. Individuals are supposed to be pure by seeking a right livelihood and promoting life in everything that they do. The sixth part of the Eightfold Path would be right effort, stressing the will to overcome evil. So there'd be right effort there. Number 7 would be having right awareness. We must think of our bodies as loathsome and be aware that our bodies, which are the vehicle that we use for desire, is a loathsome thing. Sin, according to the Buddha, is not the problem, but ignorance is really the problem. And so a part of that is to have awareness. So the last point on the Eightfold Path is right meditation. An individual, to achieve detachment, must have right meditation. They must do a particular yoga style called the Raja Yoga, and they must have the mantra that goes with the Raja Yoga. That would be something that Hindus would be, or a Buddhist, would be tempted to, would be told that they must practice all the time.
So I want to break free from my desires. I want perfect detachment. And if I'm going to get there, here's the Eightfold Path. I have to have right views, right desires, right speech, right conduct, right effort, right meditation. So these are this is the process by which I become detached.
Yes.
So how do I, at first, at the outset, you would say to break free from desire is insurmountable. And Buddha says, well, it can be accomplished.
Yeah.
Follow this Eightfold Path.
Yes.
Adhere to these, for lack of better words, these rules or this code of conduct.
Yeah.
And you will, in fact, be able to break free from your desire.
Yes.
Now, it's not all a bed of roses. There's some obstacles that hinder us in the Eightfold Path.
Yes.
Correct? There's some things that would interfere with our progress or our adherence to the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah.
There are some things that get in the way. So we talk about 10 fetters.
10 fetters. So the 10 fetters were the 10 things that get in the way of somebody following the Eightfold Path that an individual has to wrestle with and overcome. The first fetter or obstacle Buddha taught to one following the Eightfold Path is number 1, having a belief in a real self. In other words, for an individual to have an illusion, a delusion of self. Remember, the Buddha taught that there was no soul. So an individual must not have this idea that they are a real, genuine, true individual that has their own soul. That is considered to be a fetter. A second fetter would be a confidence in rituals. The idea that purification comes from rituals. The Buddha said we must understand that rituals are not a part of the Eightfold Path, but it's moral living. That's a part.
So officially, the teaching would be that the rituals that the poor practiced are
Yeah.
not, they're a fetter.
They're
That's an
a fetter.
example
Yeah,
of a hindrance taking place
hindrance.
that's stopping them.
Hindrance,
Yeah, right.
to achieving detachment. 3, the third fetter would be unkindness or anger. Having unkindness or anger in one's life would be a hindrance. 4th would be having spiritual pride or self-righteousness. Those would be hindrances, fetters. The 5th would be ignorance, for an individual to walk around and be an ignorant person. Number 6, doubt. Having doubt of anything that the Buddha said would be a hindrance to an individual achieving their salvation. 7, sensuality. Passions arising from the senses are considered to be a fetter, a hindrance to one achieving detachment from the suffering in this world. Number 8, a desire for life in the world of form. And what he meant by that was having a desire for a material existence, for an individual to have a desire for the material existence of this world, okay?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
squinting as I'm trying to process
Trying to
that.
understand
so
that.
My desire to exist in a physical form
Yes.
is a fetter.
Yes.
It's a problem in my progress.
Yes. Now the next would be having a desire for life in a formless world. In other words, immaterial existence. So we're not to desire either material existence, and we personally as individuals are not to desire immaterial existence either. Both of those are desires. And so we're not to desire either one. That would be extreme, and we want to avoid the extreme there. The 10th fetter was an inability for an individual to concentrate their mind, or for an individual to be just unsettled in life, to be restless. That would be considered to be a fetter that would hinder their salvation.
Okay. Okay.
A lot to unpack there.
There's a lot there. So Siddhartha, his journey to resolve the problem of suffering, he becomes enlightened. He teaches the path to perfect detachment, 4 noble truths, an 8-fold path of conduct, 10 fetters that get in the way. And if all of this is put together properly, one accomplishes nirvana, one experiences the detachment from the wheel of life, and everything's great.
Yes.
That's it. That's the end of the road here.
Yes.
Okay. Joe, before we get into the critique, is there anything else we want to say about the worldview itself?
No, I think.
Ready to?
Yeah, I
okay.
think we pretty much summarized it. We really, by doing this and covering this so quickly, we really are not doing justice to the Buddhistic worldview as a whole. But this is an introductory.
It's just a brief overview.
It's a brief overview, and so we don't want to just critique this just from the standpoint of a Christian worldview. This is just so different than what most Christians can conceive of, especially Christians in the West. Yeah. It's most people and most Christians, and certainly in the West, have never really gone through Buddhism to hear an explanation of it. So we're not trying to do it in injustice, but we are just trying to lay out some of the basic, simple truths as we look to critique. But there's so much more that could be said here, and we're not trying to disrespect any individuals who happen to be Buddhist.
But we do love the truth.
We do love the truth, and we have to believe that there is a critique here of this based upon what Buddhism says about itself.
So let's ask a few questions and answer them, shall we?
Yeah.
And one that just comes to my mind, the Buddhist that is presenting all of this to me, I just have a simple question. Who is he talking to? If I'm not supposed to desire a physical existence, and I'm also not supposed to desire an immaterial existence, and I don't have a soul, then what exactly is that person talking to? Who am I? Are they talking to me? And if that's the case, what am I? How am I supposed to conceive of myself? We see here, I think, a worldview that is fraught with contradictions. And I think we see here a worldview that collapses under the weight of its own claims, and it's incapable of standing on its own 2 feet. Here's a massive question we've asked with several other worldviews. Says who? So we have all these teachings, we have these claims about the flame and the wheel of life, and we have the 8-fold and the 10 fetters and the 4 truths, and okay, who says?
Exactly.
And now somebody might respond, well, Siddhartha says.
Siddhartha?
Yeah. You mean the guy that just sat under a tree and told me that he had a vision? Why should I believe him?
Yes.
Why do his claims carry any weight?
Yes.
Why do his own personal experiences have any bearing on ultimate reality?
Yes.
So we said back in week 1 of this class that there's a difference between an objective truth claim and a subjective experience. So just because Siddhartha sat under a tree and saw a monk with a shaved head, that doesn't qualify him to tell us things that are absolutely true about reality itself.
Yeah, we're not necessarily claiming that he lied.
Right, maybe he did have that
Maybe he
vision.
did have that
Sure.
really.
And
maybe he did
felt,
have that experience.
His experiences could have been valid in the sense that he really saw those things. There are people even in our day who use mind-altering drugs and see things and hear things, and so that experience all by itself doesn't qualify an ultimate claim. It doesn't. It's not a rational justification to say, now this is what's true for all of reality. So there's a big authority problem here. And I love in the notes, we talked about this a little bit in class, that's why all ultimate claims are self-attesting.
Yes.
So really, you go all the way back to Siddhartha, and it's like, well, then this is true because I say it is.
Yes.
That's a self-attesting claim.
And in reality, that's exactly the way it is. And a Buddhist, if you ask a Buddhist, well, why do you believe that? Well, I believe the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama.
Yeah.
And they may say that they've experienced or had experiences, but then the question becomes, well, how do you know that your experiences are valid?
Yeah.
And why is it that you allow Siddhartha Gautama to validate your experiences, the experiences that you've either had or think you've had?
Yeah.
So let's assume you've had those experiences. Why are you using Siddhartha Gautama as the standard, as the objective standard by which your experiences are interpreted and validated?
Isn't it possible that he was a deceiver? Could he have been lying about his visions? Could he have been exaggerating them? And that's not even to say that he was lying and did exaggerate, but is it possible for him to have lied to us? So we're talking about an ultimate claim to objective truth from a source that's less than ultimate.
When we're asking these questions of any worldview, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism, we want to say, what is it that, okay, so we've got these beliefs, we've got these teachings that this person claimed, that he experienced. He's explaining reality based upon his own personal experience. He believes that this experience that he had, he claims to believe that this is true, and that his experience was a reflection and enlightenment of the way reality truly is. What is it that anchors his truth claims to reality, to rational justification? What is it? What would make it so that these aren't just beliefs that are completely intellectually barren, that they're completely unattached to rational justification whatsoever? We don't see that. I don't see that.
I would even take that further, Joe. I would say that if you apply the teachings of Buddhism to Siddhartha's own claims, they refute themselves. So I'm going to jump off of our order here a little bit. But for example, we're told that there's no supernatural. And yet he wrestled with Mara. Who or what was that?
Yeah.
And when we talk about there not being a physical world that you're supposed to want to exist in, and there's not an immaterial world that you're supposed to want to exist in, yet he tells the story of his real personal encounter with a spiritual being, which sounds very much like a physical and spiritual being wrestling with another personal being. Like the claim destroys itself.
Yeah, there's not supposed to be any God in atheism.
There's not. And
so,
yet
that would also, I'm assuming, that would, if a supreme God's ruled out, wouldn't Mara be ruled out too, as a deity? Or as a
that makes sense.
As a demon or whatever he wrestled with?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We have a note here. Nirvana is supposedly indescribable, unexplainable, inconceivable, and unutterable.
Yeah, that was when he was asked about what is nirvana. That's the way he described nirvana.
That's the way he described it as indescribable. So it's a concept that cannot be communicated.
Yes.
And yet it's being taught
yes.
as an ultimate goal.
Yes.
There's so many rational contradictions there. I love what you said in class when we talked about this. If that's the case, if nirvana is indescribable and unutterable, then when somebody says, "What is it?" you should just say, But otherwise, you're uttering words to describe it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a little bit of a problem.
But we're back to this experiential thing.
Yes.
You just have to experience it.
You just have to experience it.
It can't be described. It can't be communicated. It can't be defined. It has to be experienced. So then I could say, what does?
Right.
What has to be experienced? Nirvana. Well, what's that? Right? Like you are defining
Right,
something.
right.
And you are describing something.
You are and you aren't.
Yeah, at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We've talked about the me being lost in the of reincarnation. I'm going to be really selfish here, Joe. Why should I care if I cease to exist, and there's just some sort of impersonal flame that goes on into the next life? Then there's no real reason for me to embrace any of this. I could just live for pleasure. I could just live for myself right now, and I'm no the worse for it in the end, because I'm done when this life is done, and there's just a flame that goes on. There's no personal accounting for my actions, personally speaking.
Yeah, and the question also would arise as, why is it that my present existence suffers from the karma of the previous person that I inherited the karma of my reality, of my being from? You know, why is it that any suffering in my life, which got passed on through the karma and I was going to have to experience in this life, based upon my present position on the wheel of life, why was it that any good or or any evil that the previous life form passed on to me, why do I have to endure that? Like it's not fair if I'm a poor, suffering peasant that's lived in dire, horrible, unpleasant circumstances my whole life, filled with suffering. Why is it that I was born into this existence? Why is it that I presently suffer the existence, and the previous individual who did not get passed on their flame to me, even though I can't believe that there's a real me with a real soul. I still am suffering. You know, somebody's suffering. Yep. And my existence, which is filled with suffering, was affected by the previous life and some other believers' actions, or their non-actions, and the immoral life that they lived.
What kind of life?
Right.
You said immoral life?
Immoral life.
So there's a debt incurred for the immoral actions of a previous life? Well,
there must be.
What
right?
are we talking about when we say immoral?
Yes.
What is the standard that karma is using to judge a person's life? What is good? What is evil?
Yeah. So now we see karma, which in Hinduism was really tied really tightly to the caste system. Now karma seems to be tied to what the Buddha taught. So was the Buddha claiming that karma and the rules for what were moral and immoral, as he taught them, did karma change its mind as to what was moral and immoral? Or was Buddha claiming that Hinduism was wrong in its conception of karma, and that his conception, karma always was as the way that he taught that it was? And you know, the Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the Fetters, you know, that was really the accurate way that karma should be judging right and wrong, based on his teachings. See, these are real problems here, because we're not really, okay, so how did the right and the wrong become changed as it moved from Hinduism to Buddhism?
And there's still there's still no transcendent moral lawgiver to establish a standard.
And there's no transcendent moral lawgiver.
There's no standard of morality.
Other than what the Buddha said. But as we delve into, even as we were describing it, we can talk about the Eightfold Path, we can talk about the 10 fetters, and we can ask ourselves, well, I wonder what that means. Well, I wonder what that means.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if you have an opinion about that, is that opinion correct or is that not correct? Oh, well, in your opinion, if it's correct, what would that also mean? Yeah. What are the implications of all that? So it just kind of goes down this chain of like, is this action really right or is it really wrong? Or how's it fit there? How's it fit? What if I have it wrong, you know? What if I have the Eightfold Path wrong? What if I have one of the fetters, my idea about what are the fetters wrong, and I'm living immorally there? You know, remember, it's this intense
Yep.
personal effort to salvation,
Yep.
right?
The whole thing is as dripping with arbitrariness. An eightfold path, why isn't it a ninefold path or a threefold path? Where was that information discovered? In his personal enlightened experience? So again, remember we said inconsistency and arbitrariness. So they're both popping up here in big ways. Just because he said so, and even though he's saying one thing here that contradicts something else here, it doesn't matter. It's not ultimately important. Joe, we had a note in here that was really sad, just considering the Buddhist concept of prayer. Right? We had a note in here just talking about petitionary prayer.
Petitionary prayer. So Buddhists do pray.
Yeah.
Buddhists do pray. But based on everything that we've said previously, the conception of the prayer, it would seem, it's certainly a problem for Christians to understand.
Sure.
And we would have to say, does it really make any sense? I'm going to let you explain that a little bit.
Yeah, we think of prayer in biblical terms of a human communicating with the personal, transcendent God who's listening.
Yeah.
So we think of it as a communication with a living God. In Buddhism, petitionary prayer is not necessarily made to a God who's listening, because again, there is no God. There is no personal, transcendent God in this worldview. But the prayers are supposedly made to other people. And you could ask a logical question, and you could say, well, how do other people hear or receive or benefit from those prayers? There's not really a solid answer to that. It's kind of just a quiet fact. You pray, and somehow that's for other people. And it strikes me with this real desperate sense of aloneness, because there's no one listening. And my mind goes to the story in Scripture of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. If you recall, the prophets of Baal are crying out, and they are cutting themselves, and they're doing all these things. And the author of Kings says, no one paid attention, no one was listening. And that's really, I think, what's happening here in this Buddhist conception of prayer. There's nobody listening. And even the people that are supposedly being prayed for or prayed to, they can't hear or receive those prayers. So there's some sort of desire to benefit others, to petition and to intercede for others, but it's so confused because you're petitioning who and you're interceding to who?
Yeah, where would the power?
There's nothing there.
Where would the power?
There's nothing to hold on to.
Or the personal God who is able to answer the prayer be in that situation?
So we have a worldview, Joe, where origins are not explained. So we don't know how everything started.
Yeah, there's the problem. We haven't even touched on that. The problem of infinite regression.
So yeah, the origin question is just
one thing came from something, with no origin.
Where did karma come from?
Yeah,
where did the wheel of life come from?
Yeah,
Who made that? How did it come to be?
Yeah, and if one says, well, it's always existed, if we talk in Christianity about the existence of a timeless, spaceless God, it's different than talking about the created order.
Yeah.
The created order needs or anticipates its creation, an original point from a God, all-knowing, all-powerful, timeless and spaceless, a God who exists apart from the reality that the created order is in, that the universe is in. A Christian belief in creation actually assumes that there must be a creator that has to exist apart from or outside of his creation.
That's right.
So we don't know, we can't explain, of course, the eternal reality of God. But if we assume, starting off with what the Bible says, in the beginning God, if we start off assuming that God is timeless and spaceless, all-knowing and all-powerful, along with all of his other attributes, then there is a possible beginning point for creation. But when you just say the creation has always existed, then there's the problem of infinite regression.
And let's also remember our lesson about the dependency of man's knowledge. We're dependent knowers.
Yes.
We're finite creatures. So
In a Christian worldview.
In a Christian worldview,
in
absolutely.
the biblical worldview.
We are, right?
Yes.
But the Christian worldview explains that
Yes.
to us explicitly.
Yeah.
So I can say, when somebody says to me as a Christian believer, well, how God's eternal, God just has always existed, I can say, yes, absolutely. And somebody could say, well, how do you know that? And I could say, well, he tells me.
Yeah, he
Tells me in
revealed
his
it.
word.
There's a revealer.
Absolutely,
there.
he's
An
revealed
infinite
himself.
knower. Yeah.
Now, contrast that with Buddhism, where you say, oh, well, the cycle of the wheel of life or the flame that has been passed on, it's just always has existed. I could say, well, how do you know that?
Right.
And there's no anchor for
There's
that
no
knowledge.
rational anchor for that.
That person is claiming some sort of omniscience.
Right.
I can tell you about the eternal past
Right.
of our world.
Yeah.
How do you have access to that knowledge?
How'd they get that? How did the
10
Buddha?
million years ago.
How did the
yeah.
Buddha become enlightened?
Yeah, so let's just go all the way back. Let's say 10 million years ago,
Yes.
okay, if such a thing exists.
Yes.
How do you know the universe still works the way it
Yes.
does today?
Yes.
What basis do you have for that knowledge?
Yes.
Again, there is no rational basis for that knowledge. And so the person, it's almost like the Raja who sees the elephant. The person's claiming to be able
Yeah.
to see some ultimate aspect of reality that really a finite creature can't know.
Correct. Well, one of the things that we didn't discuss, I never put it in the notes, was in Buddhism, Buddha claimed that there were other Buddhas before him. He claimed that when the truths that he was teaching sort of die out in the world, then a new Buddha is needed, and a new Buddha has to come into existence, into being. So Siddhartha Gautama taught that there were many, many Buddhas before him. He even taught that there would be a future Buddha. If you read Buddhistic literature, many Buddhists would say that they're looking for Lord Maitreya. Maitreya Buddha is coming, they would say, is going to be the next Buddha in line. Well, where did that knowledge come from? You know, and why is it that that's claimed to be a reality? Who said? Again, who said? And how do we know if the Buddha taught that? If Siddhartha taught that? How did Siddhartha know that? How did he come to know that? Through his experience. What is it that ties his individual experience to objective reality, where the knowledge that he claimed to have had, which was so far beyond his individual human experience, with direct knowledge, how would he have claimed to know that, or that's accurate?
What is the claim? What is the authority?
Yes.
And is there a rational justification for that authority?
Always.
And
We
we're
always
asking
have to
those
ask those questions.
Yeah. What's the claim? Well, we've talked about that. Says who? Siddhartha. Is there a rational justification? No. I mean, the plain answer for that, and it might sound arrogant, but the plain answer for that is no, there's not a rational justification to embrace this worldview.
Right.
What sins do we see committed here? Arbitrariness, inconsistency, incoherency. The very same things that we see in other worldviews, even though they take on a bit of a mystic or a very religious facade, at the core we have the same intellectual sins taking place, where what God has said is rejected and man's own ideas are superimposed. They're put in place of God's word. And like you always do, you end up with a false worldview. You end up with a self-refuting, self-undermining worldview at the end of the day. Much more that we could say about Buddhism, but there's a brief overview for the sake of our class. And Lord willing, we'll have some time to move forward with some more worldviews in the next few weeks here. We got a couple weeks left.
Yes.
And we'll try to bring this to a close, and maybe the Lord will give us some opportunities to dig a little deeper in the future in other settings. But there's our 30,000-foot overview of Buddhism.
That's it.
Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, once again, for everything that you've ever said to us. Thank you for the scriptures, and thank you for eyes to see and ears to hear. Lord, only you can open our eyes. Only you can open our ears and our hearts. And we thank you for your speaking to us in the Bible. We love you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.